One of the topics much discussed these days in the society, church, and religious circles is leadership. Though the cry for authentic leaders has been heard in every age, today it has become louder in every field. The Bible is one of the greatest collections of stories of various types of leaders. From the beginning, God chose leaders to lead His people. We find very inspiring stories of kings and warriors, strategists and visionaries, men and women leaders. I would like to reflect with you one of the righteous persons and also great leaders in the Bible, in the Old Testament after Moses, is Joshua. He teaches us many leadership qualities for our times. As we read in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34, verses 5 and 6, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died in the land of Moab, and he was buried in a valley there. So Moses died. In verse 9 we read, Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him and the Israelites obeyed him. Now Moses died, as we read in the book of Joshua, first chapter, verses 1 and 2. Now Moses died. The Lord spoke to Joshua to lead the people to promised land. Now the responsibility of leading Israel people to the promised land has been placed on young leader Joshua after the death of Moses. Thus the leadership was gently handed over to Joshua. Transition is a part of life. Leaders, they finish the term and go, but their spirit has to go on. God buries His workers, but His work, His mission, His spirit goes on. God promises Joshua, as we read in verse 5, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. What a beautiful promise God makes to Joshua. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Again the Lord strengthens Joshua with these words in verse 9. Be strong and courageous. The Lord is strengthening Joshua. Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for I am with you wherever you go. Under the leadership of Moses, the Israelites had crossed the Red Sea. Now, another hurdle to enter into the promised land, that was to break the Jericho wall. Jericho walls built with solid stones were formidable and seemed impenetrable. The tired Israelites were now faced with a hopeless situation. But in a seemingly hopeless situation, the powerful God can do things to our surprise and in our favor. The walls crumbled and Joshua drove out the alien kings and occupied the land. With this victory, Canaan became an Israelite country. The promise made to Abraham was fulfilled now under Joshua's leadership. Joshua was God's chosen leader. He is introduced in the first chapter, in the first verse, as the assistant or a servant of Moses. Joshua spent 20 years in Egypt under the slavery, 40 years in the wilderness under the leadership of Moses, and another 50 years in the promised land. God used the first 60 years of Joshua's life as a slave to the Egyptians and an assistant to Moses to prepare him well to lead God's people into the promised land. God was refining and preparing Joshua for what he was to do next. After Moses' death, Joshua continued his mission. What do we read at the end of the book of Joshua, chapter 24, verse 29? The servant of Moses became the servant of the Lord. At the beginning of the chapter, first chapter, the servant of Moses, that's how Joshua was called. Now, at the end of the book, in the last chapter, the servant of Moses became the servant of the Lord. Joshua had an ordinary beginning as a servant of Moses, but ended as the Lord's servant. Our beginnings may be good, but what matters is how we end up. Whatever great things we do, what is important is how we do our mission during our journey and how we end our mission. For example, King Solomon built a grand temple for the Lord. The world remembers him for his wisdom, the wisest person. The Lord was very much pleased with him, as we read in the first book of Kings, chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. But towards the end, we read that the Lord was very much upset and angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, and the Lord decided to tear the kingdom away from him, as we read in the same first book of Kings, chapter 11, verses 10 and 11. In chapter 3, the Lord was pleased with Solomon. In chapter 11, the Lord was angry with Solomon. Another example we see in the book of Judges. There we read about Samson. He began well, but we know how he ended his life, as we read in the book of Judges, chapter 16, verses 23 to 30. A good beginning is important, but a good ending is important as well. Today, every title is available for money, and not this title, the servant of the Lord. Every time Joshua writes about himself in this book, he calls himself the servant of Moses. Joshua's writings end with the last chapter 24, verse 28. After Joshua's death, another person writing about Joshua says, Joshua, the servant of the Lord, as we read verses from 29 to 33. Now Joshua became the servant of the Lord, written by someone else. More than what I say about myself, those who live with me and those who relate with me and inspired by my values should be able to write, I have been inspired by her, I have been inspired by him, or I have learned from her, or I have been influenced by him. The woman of Zarephath said to Elijah, as we read in the first book of Kings, chapter 17:24, the Zarephath woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God. Elijah didn't tell her about him. The woman discovered something in Elijah. She says to him, now I know that you are a man of God. When Elisha was passing through Shunem, the Shunammite woman invited him for a meal and said to her husband, as we read in 2nd book of Kings, chapter 4, she said to her husband, look, I'm sure this man is Elisha, who regularly passes our way, is a holy man of God. And she repeats the same about Elisha as a man of God in the same chapter 4, verses 9, 21, 22 and 27. Would others be able to say about me, truly she is a God's person, she or he is his servant? It's easy for those living away from us to bear testimony to the way I live. But can those live close to me or living with me all the time, can those people say that about me? She is God's person, servant of God? We are not entering into detailed study of the life of Joshua. We are going to reflect the noble characteristics of Joshua. Let's see what we can learn from his leadership. Lesson 1. Transition of leadership is part of life. Change is normal in the hierarchy of the church and in the religious life as well. Change or transition is in fact a healthy part of one's mission. However great a leader may be, it becomes necessary to step down someday. Joshua took up leadership after Moses. Moses laid hands on Joshua, and Joshua was filled with the spirit of wisdom. As we read in Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 9, we reflected this verse already. Joshua was filled with the spirit of wisdom since Moses laid hands on Joshua. Joshua was totally different from Moses. Though the leadership of both was from the same Holy Spirit, wisdom given to Joshua looked very different from the wisdom given to Moses. God worked differently through Joshua from the way he worked through Moses. This will be true of our leaders today as well. Be encouraged to embrace those differences. Maybe God is saying, look, I am working through this leader now. I have the freedom to work through this leader differently. Joshua didn't garner popularity by putting down Moses' weaknesses or highlighting Moses' failures. We learn here how to take care to honor the legacy of our previous leadership, even when you are thrilled about the changes the new leadership is making. You couldn't be who you are without God's work through the previous leaders. If you are suffering from the fallout of your previous leaders' mistakes, seek to find healing without gossip or vindication. God is the ultimate judge, and as He judged Moses, He will also judge our leaders. Rehearsing their wrongdoing or nursing bitterness against them won't help you or anyone around you. This is the beautiful quality first lesson we learn from the leadership of Joshua. The second lesson, Joshua's obedience. After Moses died, Joshua became the leader of the Israelites. The pressure of this new responsibility was great. He was to lead more than 2 million people into a foreign land to conquer and claim it as their own. Joshua could have easily been frightened or discouraged thinking about his opponents. But the Lord promised Joshua to be with him. He encouraged Joshua to be strong, brave, and obedient. The secret of true success then and now is complete obedience to God. We must trust that God is with us also in every experience, as He was with Moses and as He was with Joshua. As we obey His word, He will give us the strength and courage we need to face whatever challenges come our way. New experiences can be frightening, but with God leading our lives, these challenges can be thrilling and rewarding. Courage is more than doing heroic things. It is a capacity to admit one's mistakes and imperfections with all humility. The third lesson Joshua is teaching us is Joshua's commitment to his previous leader Moses. Joshua obeyed Moses both when he was alive and after his death. As we read in the book of Joshua chapter 8 verses 34 and 35. Joshua obeyed Moses both when he was alive and after his death. Joshua did whatever Moses commanded him. He left nothing undone. We read in chapter 11:15. Joshua did whatever Moses commanded him. He left nothing undone. Joshua led the people in the way the Lord commanded him through his leader Moses. We know from our experience what happens whenever there is a change in leadership. Moses went up the mountain to talk to God. This is a small example in this context. Now Moses is gone to the mountain to talk to God. When he did not come down even after 40 days, the same people who had told Moses in Exodus 19:7 and 8, he told Moses, "You go and talk to him. Then you come and tell us. We will do whatever the Lord commands us." People told Moses, "You go and talk to God. Then you come and tell us. We will do whatever the Lord commands us." But these people very soon lost their faith and pressured Aaron to set up a golden calf to worship, as we read in Exodus 32 verses 1 to 6. Aaron, who was leading the people in the absence of Moses, succumbed to the pressure of the people and gave up the values of God. In the absence of a spiritual leader just for a few days, see what happened. In front of Moses, they said something that we will do everything what the Lord is commanding you. That's what they told Moses. And when his return was delayed, they did something else. Isn't it our experience too that our behavior in the presence of the leader is different from in their absence? The book of Sirach says in chapter 23 verses 18 and 19, "Who can see me? Darkness surrounds me. The walls hide me and no one sees me. Why should I worry? No one sees me." St. Paul is writing to the Ephesians, as we read in Ephesians chapter 5 verse 10, "Do what is pleasing to the Lord." Am I trying to please people? If I were still pleasing people, as we read in Galatians 1:10, I would not be a servant of Christ. Do as your inner conscience directs you. Let us read again these verses from the book of Joshua chapter 8, 34 and 35. There was not a word of Moses Joshua left out. We have reflected thus far 3 noble characteristics of Joshua's leadership. We will continue our reflections in this line in the next video, part 2, and learn a few more significant lessons from Joshua to become effective leaders.